Welcome to this webinar, Water, Energy, Food Nexus in Tropical Forest Regions, Managing Resource Trade-off Across Sectors and Scale. This webinar is organized by CDKN, the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. So I would like to tell you a little bit more about our network. The Climate and Development Knowledge Network works to change the quality of life for people most challenged by the effects of climate change. We aim to bridge climate change and development policy, enabling developing countries to achieve a low-carbon and climate-resilient future, along with poverty reduction and human development. CDKN supports decision-makers in governments, the private sector, and non-governmental sectors at national, regional, and global level in designing and delivering climate-compatible development. We do this by combining research, advisory services, and knowledge sharing in support of locally owned and managed policy processes. CDKN is a North-South alliance that brings together a wide range of expertise and experience. PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Overseas Development Institute, Lead Pakistan, Fundación Futuro Latinoamericano in Ecuador, and South-South-North in South Africa. Our team includes climate scientists, researchers, economists, consultants, and project managers, along with specialists in communication, knowledge management, and partnership building. CDKN offers a distinctive demand-led approach. Decision makers determine the kind of support we provide, and we help align it with a broader context of development policies and planning. We link bottom-up to top-down, working at international, national, and subnational levels. Within the broad scope of climate-compatible development, we work across 4 strategic themes: climate-compatible development policies and practice, improving developing countries' access to climate finance, strengthening resilience through climate-related disaster risk management, and supporting climate negotiators from the least developed and most vulnerable countries. So as I said before, this webinar is organized by CDKN, and especially this one together with the Global Canopy Program. So I will tell you a little bit about the logistics about this webinar. Today's presentation will be recorded and it will be uploaded in our YouTube channel, CDKN Network. There are also 2 options for listening to this session. One is through plugging into your computer and the other via telephone that was provided in your registration message. If you experience audio difficulties in listening to this session, this is because you have too many browser windows or software open, so feel free to close this. Questions are very welcome, so please write them in the questions section that you can find in the toolbar on your GoToWebinar screen. We will try to answer as many questions as possible in the time available. We will answer questions at the end of the session. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a chat message to me and we will try to sort it out. We would appreciate if you can answer the polls and surveys during and after the webinar, as they help us in understand more your needs. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Maria Jose Pacha, and I am the Knowledge and Network Manager for Latin America and the Caribbean for the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. And I would like to welcome our speaker. Our speaker is Helen Belfield. She is the Programs Manager at the Global Canopy Program, a tropical forest think tank based in Oxford. Prior to this role, she has led the Global Canopy Program's work on forest and water, energy, and food security, including the Amazonia Security Agenda and a new project in Indonesia on mobilizing efforts to reduce deforestation for water, energy, and food security. Helen has a degree in natural sciences from the University of Cambridge. And I would like to welcome Helen to this webinar and thank her for her time. And we would like to know a little bit more about you. It would be great to know more our audience. So I would appreciate if you can answer what you see on screen, whether you are a researcher, a student, a governmental representative, a climate change professional, or an NGO representative. So far, more of our audience is NGO representative and climate change professional. Okay, thank you for this. And with this, I will give the floor to Helen. Helen, please, the floor is yours. We can try to see whether you can use the mouse to pass the slides. If not, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and please let me know if you can't hear me. Thank you for attending and listening today. So first of all, a quick introduction to the water, energy, food nexus, which came out of the World Economic Forum in 2011 and highlighted very strongly that the close interdependencies between water, energy, food and climate needed to be recognized in addressing water security issues. The concept has since emerged as an important narrative in the science policy interface for sustainable development and has been adopted by a wide range of civil society, business and policy fora and dialogues, as shown on this slide. Maria, I don't seem to be able to click on.
Okay, I will
say
pass.
Next?
Yes, okay.
Great. So it's clear that the water, energy, food nexus means different things to different people. So I want to clarify the perspective we've taken in our projects. So natural resources, including land, ecosystems and their services, underpin water, energy and food systems globally. Next. Water, energy and food systems are all interdependent. Each relies on the other, with water at the heart of this nexus. For example, water underpins agricultural production, which accounts for around 70% of water use globally. In turn, agricultural withdrawals and pollution impact downstream water availability and quality. Water is also vital for energy, including hydropower, thermal power plants, and now biofuel crops, whilst energy is closely connected with water systems, for example through pumping for water supply, sanitation and waste treatment. Next. So increasing global demand for water, energy and food due to larger and wealthier populations is now putting pressure on these systems. And here we can see some of the very high predictions of increased demand for a population of 9 billion people projected for 2050. And this is in the context of a planet already under pressure, as illustrated by this planetary boundaries concept. Can we go back one? Thank you. Which shows that for climate change, biodiversity loss, we're already operating out of this green safe space where there's high uncertainty and risks. Next. In summary, our interpretation of the nexus highlights the role of ecosystems in underpinning water, energy and food security, and the importance of water at the heart of this nexus. This is important as ecosystems are often not fully represented in water, energy, food nexus dialogues, and risks from environmental degradation, although significant, are not fully understood or accounted for in decision making. It's also important to note that these interdependencies are dynamic and that these trade-offs and synergies are influenced by factors such as climate change, markets and policies. Next. So before I introduce the two CDKN projects, I want to give some quick background context on the water, energy, food or WEF nexus in tropical forests. So the clouds in this photo show the vital role of tropical forests in generating and recycling rainfall. And some studies have shown in Amazonia that up to 50% rainfall received in the region is recycled. Next. So research has also shown that fresh water is exported far beyond the forest. In this slide, you can see water moisture from the ocean is drawn in over Amazonia, and then through these flying rivers, water is exported south into the economic heartlands of Brazil and the La Plata Basin, where it's been estimated that 20% of the rainfall in the La Plata Basin originates in Amazonia. Next. And as we've seen, this rainfall underpins agricultural production, both for domestic food security and export crops. Next, and also energy generation, such as hydropower, is shown in this photo. Next, yet this economic development has gone hand in hand with deforestation in tropical regions, primarily driven by agriculture, eroding forest ecosystem services, threatening long-term water security, and contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Next, climate change is predicted to add as a threat multiplier, with 2 significant droughts in Amazonia over the last decade, and El Nino drought impacts in Indonesia, both in 1997 and this year, offering a glimpse of future vulnerability. So in this context, the key question is, what are the opportunities where a water, energy, food nexus framework can help decision makers assess likely risks and trade-offs? Next. So the Sustainable Development Goals and the upcoming climate negotiations provide a timely opportunity to clarify how the WEF nexus can contribute to climate compatible development. For example, the SDGs contain 17 goals and 169 targets, including for water, energy, food, ecosystems and climate. Yet there's a clear need to understand how in implementation at the national and subnational levels, these goals, which are intrinsically linked, can be coordinated. Next. So in this context, and given the ambitious national development plans and competing interests and needs across sectors and scales, putting increasing pressure on resources in tropical forest regions, the Amazon Security Agenda project, which started in 2012, aims to support governments in the region to understand the risks and trade-offs for different stakeholders across scales and sectors linked to natural resource management in Amazonia. And secondly, opportunities for proactively addressing trade-offs through governance arrangements, particularly linked to these emerging climate and development policy frameworks. Next. So some very quick key findings from the Amazon Security Agenda project synthesis of the evidence base for impacts and interdependencies of forests, water, energy and food security include, as shown here on this map, the growing threat to water security from the extractive industry pollution. So 21% of the Amazon is under some form of mining exploitation or concession, and 14% is under some form of oil exploitation or concession. Next, please. So Amazonia is key for regional energy security with resources in oil, gas, and water. So in particular, the potential for new hydropower in the region is gigantic, as seen on the right-hand graph here, which shows in red the current hydropower developed, and in grey the technical remaining potential. Given this, 30 new dams are planned for the Brazilian Amazon by 2020, and 59 across the Andean Amazon. Next. So growing demand for exports is a key driver of agricultural expansion, with agriculture the largest driver of deforestation. In particular, as you can see in this graph here, demand for China has driven the expansion of Amazon soy in recent years, and accounts for some percent of soy exports in 2020. A factor of 10 since 9 of exports of
Helen?
2010 offered a glimpse of the future challenges. Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I think that there was a problem in the sound. Just to be aware that I will give you a chat
Next.
message if this is the case.
Again?
Okay, we can hear you now. Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Can you, next slide? Great. So the droughts in 2005 and 2010 in Amazonia, as shown here, and sorry the slide is in Spanish, but offered a glimpse into the future challenges under climate change, with energy blackouts, destroyed crops, mass displacements of people, and outbreaks of waterborne and respiratory diseases. It also highlights the real terms, the interdependence of these securities with all of these impacts happening at one time, really stretching the ability of the government to respond to these issues. Next. So the Amazon Security Agenda held a high-level regional dialogue with government representatives from the 5 focal countries of Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, and who discussed and informed by this evidence base, recommended that the countries, in order to achieve sustainable development under climate change, would need to account for and balance future water, energy, and food trade-offs in the Amazon region within integrated conservation, climate, and development planning. So next. So building on these initial recommendations, the project did a further scoping study where we held nearly 50 interviews with stakeholders in government, civil society, and the private sector in the region to identify strategic priorities and existing processes or policy windows which will provide an entry point for this water, energy, food analysis to be able to have impact. For example, the long history of integrated water resource management in the region provides one opportunity, as does integrating ecosystem-based adaptation into development planning. And finally, participatory scenario development to build shared understanding across sectors and actors of the likely trade-offs was identified as a possible entry point. Next, please. For example, as shown in this diagram, the Secretariat of Strategic Affairs for the Presidency of Brazil conducted national 2040 adaptation scenarios through a multi-sectorial process to assess the likely impacts of climate change and identify strategies for adaptation. So very focused, as you can see with the water resources highlighted in the diagram, the approach took water as the heart of previously, and rather than positing a certain future, it abilities and how climate change should be addressed within national development. Next. So in terms of the Amazon Security Agenda project, the next steps are to complete a policy coherence analysis using the water, energy, food analytical framework, working closely with government in Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. Here we're going to map policies and governance arrangements across sectors and scales, identify gaps and opportunities, and also have a look at the role of the corporate sector in influence trade-offs through a case study focused on corporate decision-making within agricultural commodity supply chains in the region. Next. So now moving on to Indonesia. So building on lessons from the project, the second project on mobilizing efforts to reduce deforestation for water, energy, and security. in Indonesia is focused on nationally, but also subnationally in Aceh province. Next. So again, the policy context is of ambitious national development targets linked to natural resources. There's a clear likelihood of trade-offs. As you can see from this slide, there are very ambitious agricultural expansion plans for different food crops, including rice, corn, and soy, as well as a target to double palm oil production by the end of 2020. And to similarly expand irrigation systems to support this, mainly in forest areas, which has a potential to conflict with forest conservation goals, with agriculture the largest driver of deforestation traditionally in Indonesia, but also with renewable energy targets, which has put biofuels on degraded land as a key strategy to deliver this renewable energy target of 23% of the energy matrix by 2020. And here, competition for land and water between biofuels and food crops could lead to potential trade-offs. There's also significant, if you go to the next slide, there's significant coordination challenges across sectors. For example, many of the different ministries are using their own data sets and maps, resulting in forest areas being concessioned out multiple times. There's also a question of coordinating across scales. So while these very ambitious national targets have been set at the national level, these are going to be implemented at the regional scales, both provincially and then at the local scale. And the project case study in Aceh will explore coordination across these three scales of national, province, and local, and look at how these national ambitious targets translate into action at the local scale. So if you go to the next slide. So in Indonesia, what are the policy windows where a WEF Nexus framework can support the government? And I think a key one here is the Indonesia's intended nationally determined contribution, which the government has just submitted ahead of the climate change conference in Paris. The strategic approach outlined in this policy document highlights the importance of natural resource management for water, food and energy systems in order to achieve climate compatible development. And it recognises that its implementation will require significant coordination across sectors and scales, and also capacity building at the local level. Next. So focusing now on Aceh province. In Aceh is an autonomous state in Indonesia, which has a slightly different context. It's just developed its new spatial plan, which in coordination with regional development plans is the main planning tool at the regional scale. This new spatial plan proposes changing the forest classification of some areas of the Lausa National Park, which is highlighted on this map here in green, from national park to production forest, weakening the protection of this critical area of primary forest. This spatial plan has been rejected by the Ministry of Home Affairs at the national level from a number of reasons, but one reason is the Lausa ecosystem is recognised as of national strategic importance. Yet this spatial plan has been passed by the Aceh Parliament, and to our knowledge is currently being implemented in the region. If you go to the next slide. So this concession map from the public crowdsourced platform Hutan Aceh illustrates some of the competing interests and needs spatially across forests, timber, palm oil and mining, which is linked in with the spatial planning. So what are the opportunities in Aceh in informing spatial planning and development planning? So if you go to the next slide. So this slide here, as you'll soon see, the sign. Oh, not sure this is working properly, but this demonstrates the problem of droughts, which Aceh has suffered in recent years, affecting rice production in the northeast, as well as fishing. If we go to the next slide. Just while we get some more examples. So here you can, from a recent scoping study trip, this is a photo I took of a flooded palm oil plantation on previously what would have been peatland, showing the economic risks from development which is not planned under recognizing future risks from climate change and seawater rise. If we go to the next slide. And as well as within the caucus, which is NGOs led by the which is also recognised an opportunity to engage on the issue. Research which identified that only actually engaged with Parliament, and they recognise that Parliament, through its power to approve and set budgets, is actually an important actor in development policy in the region. So this new Sustainable Development Caucus offers one policy window and opportunity to engage with through the project's analysis of water, energy, food security. So if we go to the next slide. So finally, we're taking a very similar approach to the work in Amazonia in Indonesia. So we'll be mapping policies and government arrangements across water, energy, food at the national level, but also subnationally in Aceh. We'll also be doing some detailed studies of trade-offs at the local scale in Aceh, focusing on rice production and deforestation in upstream watersheds, palm oil production, and possibly hydropower dams. And we'll be publishing the findings for both Indonesia and Amazonia's policy coherence analysis in the early new year. These analyses will then form the basis of ongoing discussions and engagement with government at both the national and subnational level, and the identification of recommendations to adopt water, energy, or to address water, energy and food trade-offs within development and adaptation planning. So thank you for listening, and please ask any questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Helen, for this very illustrative presentation about the water, food, and energy nexus. We would like to share Helen's email, and also there is a website from the Amazon Security Agenda that you will receive in your emails after the webinar, so you can look into more detail and at the different publications and other products. So I would like to know if people have some questions about this presentation. And if you have, you can ask, you can write them in the chat window provided. I have some questions, Helen, from my side. Well, do you think that the governance structures need to be adapted or reformed in order to address the interdependencies of water, energy, and food security at multiple scales?
Yes, I think it's crucial to work within existing governance structures rather than proposing completely new ideas. I think, as we saw with the scenario adaptations produced in Brazil by the Secretariat of Strategic Affairs. I think there is an opportunity for more participatory and multi-sectoral scenario development and linked governance mechanisms and arrangements which promote participation of other stakeholders to help inform planning which has buy-in and engagement from the different stakeholders and actors. Ultimately, water, energy and food nexus is a very political process and will involve negotiations around trade-offs and making concessions between the different actors involved. So I think there is a definite opportunity around multi-sectoral decision-making and governance arrangements. I think in Indonesia, the Ministry of Environment has been merged with the Ministry of Forestry, the National Climate Change Council and RED Plus. And in the interim, the government has taken the decision to for a new national and a temporary institution called the National Steering Committee on Climate Change, which is a multi-stakeholder body and has been responsible for submitting Indonesia's INDC to the Paris COP. So I think that's a positive step where the government has recognised the benefit of multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder governance arrangements.
Okay, well, thank you. And do you think that how can we make the climate lens for the West more explicit?
So I think, as I highlighted in the presentation, the environment, including ecosystems but also climate, is often a missing part of the water, energy, food nexus dialogues. I think recognizing the role of recognizing water, energy and food security resilience as critical for climate adaptation, and also the role of ecosystems within mitigation. So ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation is a route in which we can highlight how, or we can introduce a climate element within the Nexus framework.
Okay. And I was wondering, when you were working in the Amazonian security agenda, which are the challenges that you faced while implementing this project, if any?
So I think critical challenges are, what is the value of the Nexus concept? I think it's seen by some as another piece of jargon, which doesn't have much use beyond very clearly showing the interdependencies and improving understanding of these. I think that's where this new phase of the project, looking at applying a water, energy, food analytical framework to the policy coherence mapping, can demonstrate how this approach can identify concrete gaps and opportunities to improve natural resource management. But I think there is a challenge in the project is firstly explaining the water, energy, food nexus in a clear way, and secondly demonstrating its application to policy making rather than just to research.
Yes, and I guess that you have to collect a lot of information and data. Has this been a challenge, in considering that you're working at the regional level with several countries?
Yes, I think
Okay, I cannot hear you. I don't know whether you can hear me.
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. I don't know whether you answered the question about the challenges in data
Hello,
collection.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So yes, it is a challenge. I think data is power, and there's a definite nervousness in sharing data, both at the country level, sharing it regionally, as seen by the attempts by different NGOs within Amazonia to create a sort of a one map of the region, pulling together data from the different government agencies. and also in Indonesia, where there isn't even the different ministries don't even use a standard data or maps. A One Map initiative was started by the Red Plus agency under the past government, and I think the fact that that One Map initiative was still ongoing, 2 years later, is still collecting input and different data and maps from the different ministries, shows the challenge of collecting this data. But I think it's also nexus is understanding the interests, needs, and perspectives of the different actors, because ultimately it's a political process, as I said. So I think understanding their perspectives and their understanding of the different trade-offs is a real in achieving change.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, Helen, I think that these are all the questions that we have for now. I want to thank the people that took their time to assist this webinar, to attend this webinar, and watch this space for more development into the web or the Nexus agenda for Indonesia and Amazonia. Thank you very much, Helen, for your time as well. Bye bye, everyone.